Today we are out here at Ghost Fleet Oysters in Topsail, North Carolina. So, could you tell us a little bit of how you got into oyster farming in the first place?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a funny story for us. We moved to, Rachel was in grad school and she went to VCU up in Richmond, and so we fell in love with Virginia's oyster culture while we were living there, and so we kind of just became obsessed. And so when we moved back to North Carolina, we were living in Raleigh, and we just had a dream, and we decided to make it come true. And so we moved from Raleigh down here to the coast and started the adventure of oyster farming, and here we are today. So
awesome. How many years have you been doing this?
So this is our second year as an oyster farm, so we're working in our second season, and it feels like a lot longer than 2 years though. So for us, it started with a whole lot of paperwork and a whole lot of investigation, and so it's a long process to get to be able to farm oysters, but once you arrive there, it's really rewarding. So the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries has an application process and a leasing process that's open to the public, and anyone can go look at it and investigate it as a possible career. And so that's what we did, and we ended up here farming oysters. So
cool. So can you describe a typical day as an oyster farmer?
Yeah, so a typical day usually requires waking up early before sunrise to try to get out on the farm as early as you can. For one, you're trying to beat some recreational boating traffic and get out to the farm, get all the gear out there that you need for the day, get everything set up and staged, and then we'll come out to the farm and we'll just start working oyster gear all day. Bottom cages, floating cages, all sorts of different kinds of cages. We're going to be sorting through different sizes of oysters, from small ones to big ones to market size. And then the day is not over then, because if we're going to bring anything back in for market, we're going to load them onto the boat. We're going to bring them back to where we process oysters, and we're going to process them, bag them, tag them, get them ready for sale. And then if we have to make any deliveries, then at that point we'll keep on to the journey, and then the next day it's all over again. So it's usually a early morning and a long night, and then cleaning everything up and just working as hard as you can is the best way to do it. And then there's a whole lot of paperwork that we have to keep on top of as well for sanitation reasons. So yeah.
Some long days.
Long days.
Long days,
really
yeah.
Long days, yeah.
So how do you typically sell your oysters? Is it directly to clients, or is it mostly to restaurants?
Yeah, so we sell to anyone that's interested in buying oysters. So we sell directly to the consumer, to the fish house, to restaurants. We're open to everybody, so there's no one that's off limits to us. We're a shellfish dealer, so as long as our oyster lease is open and we can sell oysters, then we'll be more than happy to accommodate that.
At what size do you tend to sell your oysters? Is it by the bushel, or is it a different count, or how do you package them up for customers?
Yeah, so as oyster farmers, we sell by the count. So we sell 100 oysters at a time. We do sell different quantities if requested, but typically we sell by the 100. So if you want to, that's a little different than a wild harvest bushel. That's 8 gallons roughly. So we sell just by the count. So each oyster is individually counted, cleaned, made sure it's perfectly what you're looking for, and then we sell them to you. We don't have a size requirement, but we typically sell an oyster that's 3 to 4 inches is typically what we're selling to our customers. So.
You mentioned earlier wild caught. What might be the difference between wild caught and what you do here at Ghost Fleet?
Yeah, so Ghost Fleet Oyster Company sells oysters year round. So we have the ability to sell every month, every day, as long as our waters are open. So the difference there is wild harvest oysters are a diploid, and we are farming triploid oysters. Now, in the future, there may be a opportunity for farmers to farm diploids more commonly here in North Carolina, but currently they're triploids, so they don't spawn in the summertime. The wild harvest oysters are diploids, so they're spawning all summer long. When the water's warm, they're spawning. So we don't want to take those wild harvest or those wild oysters out of the water to harvest them, because otherwise we'll be depleting the population and they won't be able to bring themselves back. So as oyster farmers, we're farming these triploids, and so they're not reproducing all summer, and we're able to just sell you an oyster all year long. So just to give you a little bit of background about where our oysters come from, so we buy them from a hatchery, and so the hatchery takes them and gives them to a nursery. So basically what that means is when they have this brood stock of oysters, and these oysters are a strong bunch of oysters, and they increase the water temperature, and these oysters spawn, and that fertilized egg wants to set somewhere. So they take oyster shells, they grind them up to almost little pieces of sand, and as these fertilized eggs set, they set on these little pieces of sand, and they give you one single oyster. And so then these oysters from the hatchery, they go to a nursery. They can also go straight to the farmer. So we buy some from the hatchery and some from the nurseries. So what we do is we have cages. These cages are very small mesh, and we put these tiny little oysters in them, and we just keep growing them from there. So that is what we call an oyster seed. And the seed is what we're purchasing as oyster farmers. Just like any other farmer will purchase seed, we also purchase seed. And then we grow the seed to the market size. And we'll show you different cages and bags and how that whole entire process works. And as they grow, we sort them and we cull them, and we get the strong ones away from the weak ones, and we let the weak ones grow, and we're just constantly working on and shaping them, and just enjoying their life cycle as they go along.
Yeah, awesome. So what is the best or typical size that your client is looking for when they're getting your finished oyster product?
Yeah, so our restaurants are typically looking for that 2 3/4 to 3 1/4 inch oyster. Our direct-to-consumers are usually looking for like a 3.5 to 4 inch oyster is typically what we have found.
Yeah, okay. So you do a lot out here with the oyster farm at Ghost Fleet, and it takes a lot of time. How do you actually fund this operation, and do you have to do anything else?
Yeah, so both Rachel and I also have full-time jobs, like most oyster farmers here locally. There's very few of us that have made it to the level of being able to do it full-time. So I'm a fireman here in Surf City, and Rachel's a scientist, and so what our paths for fishing and science kind of collided and created this real passion here. So we're funded by our full-time jobs, but the goal is eventually to grow the company and to make it even more successful than it is today.
Cool. So what is your favorite way to eat these oysters?
My favorite is raw. I like them raw with a great mignonette sauce, and a mignonette sauce is like a vinegar type base sauce. It can be whatever you want to create it as, but that's sort of the best way for me personally.
So how do you actually get out here on the water? Do you own water, or where do you get it from?
Yeah, no, so we don't own the water. The water belongs to all the citizens of North Carolina, and then, you know, beyond the water body of North Carolina, it's owned by everybody. And so the way that you get an oyster lease in North Carolina is you ask for permission to lease that land, and we lease that land for 10 years. So there's a very long process that you go through with the Division of Marine Fisheries where A whole bunch of agencies review what you're hoping to do, and if they approve what you're looking for, then you can start farming oysters. It typically is at least a year-long process before you can actually start farming oysters. So it can be pretty grueling on the farmer, waiting and just kind of going through that whole process.
Yeah.
So.
That is a really long time.
So the process is really geared toward making sure that we're farming oysters in an area that is going to, help in some way. So we're going to provide additional ecosystems. We're going to provide additional resources to the bodies of water. A full-grown oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. So if we have a whole lot of oysters, we can filter a whole lot of water. So the goal is to get as many oysters out there as we can and to add to the environment.
How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about oysters?
So one of the missions of Ghost Fleet Oyster Company is education, and we do provide oyster farm tours. We want you guys to come out and visit our farm, come see how we do and what we do, and then eat some oysters with us. There's also the NC Oyster Trail. That is a website and organization that promotes local farmers and where you can find oysters in North Carolina. So check that out as well.
Now that we've eaten oysters, we clearly have the shell left over. Is there anything y'all can do with that?
Yeah, so in North Carolina, it's actually illegal to put oyster shells in a landfill, and it's also not recommended to use them in landscaping or for other purposes because we need them in our waters. When a baby oyster is looking for somewhere to put down, they look for an oyster shell. So the more oyster shells that we have out in the water, the more baby oysters that we can promote. So even farmed oyster shells are great to promote wild habitats as well. So right now, today, we are at Morris Landing Recycling Center. So contact your local oyster farmer. They'll know where to put them. Or you can look online. There's resources on there to find out where your local shellfish recycling center is.
So what is your favorite way to eat oysters?
My favorite way to eat oysters is to shuck them, add a little bit of Parmesan cheese, add some bacon bits, and then broil them in the oven. They taste awesome.
Well, Rachel and Cody, we cannot thank you enough for having us out here today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the series.